First of all, thank you. This meeting is being recorded. If you are a task force member, if you could please turn your camera on. And if you are not a task force member, if you could please keep your camera off. That will just make it a little bit easier for everyone here. If you are a task force member and you need to step away for a couple of minutes, please indicate your absence by turning your camera off and then turn it back on and you can rejoin us. For everyone's benefit, if you could please help us to avoid background noise by keeping your microphone off if you aren't speaking. And fourth, if you could please use the raise hand feature if you wish to speak. And at this point in the pandemic, I assume people know how to do that. But if not, it's down under, I believe, reactions at in the menu at the bottom of the screen. Okie dokie, let's see here. As you know, the meeting is being recorded. This will become a public record. Whether future meetings are recorded will be for voting members of this task force to decide when you consider rules. We do have a pretty full agenda today, and we've built in some decent time for conversation, more in the second half of the meeting and less in the first. So thank you in advance for your patience, as I know that several of you are eager to dig into content. We will go around and introduce ourselves in a couple of minutes, but wanted to start with a few words just explaining today's meeting and how it will be different from future meetings. So for that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Abby Bedoris. Abby?
Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. And David, just can I get a thumbs up that you hear me all right? Perfect. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of the Truth in Labeling Task Force. I'm Abby Bedoris, a legislative analyst for the land quality programs at DEQ. Thank you to the members of the task force for your willingness to serve and to dive deeply into this topic in what will be a very time-constrained effort. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes at DEQ since the passage of the Recycling Modernization Act, or Senate Bill 582. And yes, next slide, please. We've been doing planning, staffing, and we're on track to get things going as planned. Today marks the first external stakeholder engagement in the implementation plan phase of the new law. It is the first of many stakeholder opportunities, and it's really exciting to begin this long journey together. There's a graphic and other information containing other stakeholder opportunities posted on the DEQ webpage if task force members or others are interested in engaging in other opportunities. Today, you're going to see a significant role in the task force meeting from DEQ. That includes Cheryl Graham, Alex Bertolucci, David Alloway, and me. You'll meet them all in a minute. And we're here to get the task force rolling. We've developed background materials, an agenda, the presentations for today, and we're facilitating. In a while, however, you all will elect a chair for the task force. And after today, the direction for the meeting will be set by the task force and led by your chair. After today, DEQ will remain here as staff support as prescribed in statute. We hope the work we've done up to this point has helped set the table for the group to do good work in the next few months. The task force has a short lifespan with a report due to the legislature on June 1st of this year. You may have noticed that we are short 2 members today. We're still waiting on the appointment of a member from the Oregon House of Representatives and one of our local government representatives. We're working with the governor's office and the speaker's office to have that sorted out by our next meeting if possible, and we'll keep you posted. Also, a friendly reminder to the task force members to complete the required forms and other efforts that were sent to you by the governor's appointments office. Many of you actively participated in the stakeholder process and negotiations that led to the development and passage of Senate Bill 582. It's a landmark new law and addresses many of the issues impacting our recycling system. The topic of labeling was of great interest, but was not able to be resolved within the time frame of the 2021 legislative session. And it was determined that more conversation and analysis was needed to determine the next steps of that issue. And we're fortunate today and on the task force to have the sponsor of Senate Bill 582, Senator Beyer, to be a member. So thank you, Senator, for being here. So you can see the language from section 36 of the Senate bill. The task force shall study and evaluate misleading or confusing claims regarding the recyclability of products made on a product or product packaging. The study must include considerations of issues affecting accessibility for diverse audience. So there's your simple task, just 2 sentences. We'll need to study and evaluate the claims regarding recyclability and consider accessibility. Accessibility, I'll point out, is not defined, but it could include language or visibility issues. And I expect that group will talk about that as well. So with the stage set a little bit, I'm going to once again thank you all for being here and for the work ahead of time that you're going to do. And I'll turn it over back to David so we can get to know each other a little bit. And thanks again. David?
Yeah, thank you very much, Abby. All right, well, let's take a few minutes here for you all to get to know each other a little bit better. We'll go around and introduce ourselves by name, your organization, and if you could, a short summary of why you applied for the Truth in Labeling Task Force. So Senator Beyer, would you be willing to start us off here?
Certainly, David. I'm Lee Beyer. I'm a state senator representing District 6 in the legislature. That's the area that's basically central Lynn and Lane counties. And I was the chair of the committee that passed out Senate Bill 582 and worked with, I think, many of you and the DEQ staff in putting this together. I think it's going to be very beneficial to Oregon in the long run, and the labeling is a big piece of that. So I appreciate being involved.
Thank you very much, Senator, and we really appreciate your ongoing support and involvement. How about Anya Brandon? Anya?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here and to meet you all. My name is Dr. Anya Brandon. I am here representing Ocean Conservancy as an environmental nonprofit organization. I'm the plastics policy analyst for Ocean Conservancy. And I applied for the task force because I'm really interested in helping states establish best practices on a lot of these issues. And I think this is a great opportunity for Oregon. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Anya. Athena?
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Athena Petty. I lead sustainability efforts for New Seasons Market, which is a regional grocery chain. And I applied for the task force because we kind of live and breathe these questions every day. It's really exciting to think about ways to envision a less greenwashed and much clearer path for providing information to constituents and community members on what to do with the stuff. They are really eager and seeking the information. And I think that it's a really cool opportunity to be able to set some clear parameters. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Athena. Dan Felton.
Yeah, good morning, David. Thank you. Thank you, Abby. Dan Felton, Executive Director of Ameripen, the American Institute for Packaging and the Environment. We're a US-based trade association that represents the entire packaging value chain. So material suppliers, packaging manufacturers, brand owners, as well as end-of-life materials managers. We participated very actively in the negotiations on Senate Bill 582 and lots of discussions with DEQ. We're also working on this issue on a regional and national level with multiple states considering this issue as well. So it felt it was important on behalf of the industry, both in Oregon and nationally, to be involved in this issue and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Let's turn to Dylan DeThomas. Dylan?
Thank you, David. My name is Dylan DeThomas. I'm head of the policy team at the Recycling Partnership, which is a national nonprofit dedicating to improving the recycling system around the country. We work around the country to deploy grants and best practices and free tools to recycling programs around the country, both here in Oregon, but also in all the rest of the 50 states. And I applied for the Truth in Labeling Task Force because of my involvement in the recycling system, both nationally, but also here in Oregon, having the honor of being able to sit on the Oregon Recycling Steering Committee and being part of the process that ultimately led to SB 582. And I also was on the Truth in Labeling Task Force as part of that effort as well. And I'm very keen to be a part of this this effort to make sure that Oregons know what and how to recycle well, and to be able to have a proper future for recycling in the circular economy in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Jenny?
Morning, everybody. I'm Jenny Slepian, and I work with Eco Products. They are a manufacturer of compostable serviceware. They're based out of Boulder, but I am based out of Portland, and I am a product and zero waste specialist with them. And I applied for this task force for two separate reasons. One, to kind of bring the conversation about truth in composting labeling to the conversation, which is equally as important, I think. And then also, as a zero waste specialist, I work with a lot of our larger customers, universities, big restaurant chains, large stadiums, on their waste diversion. And it doesn't take long to see how complicated it is for people to try to figure out where everything needs to go. So, the labeling side of it is extremely important. And so I'm here to represent Eco Products, both on the waste diversion side, truth in recycling, but also composting as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And Sean Miller.
Yeah, good morning, David. Thank you, Sean Miller. I represent the Northwest Grocery Association, which is a regional association of grocery retailers and manufacturers in the grocery supply chain. I applied for the task force and accepted as one of the producer positions just because of my involvement in Senate Bill 582 and a lot of these packaging discussions over the many years I've represented the industry. And so, I know the state of Washington is actually going through a lot of the same discussion right now as Oregon did in passage of Senate Bill 582. And my colleague up in Washington is always looking at what we did to make sure that this consistency, particularly around that definition of producer. And I know, thanks David and Abby. I know we had to work on that back. And thanks for your accessibility on that, and you, Senator Beyer, as we work through a lot of those issues on that definition. And so, so I just wanted to be involved, just make sure that we're involved in this process. And thanks, Alex, for sending out that material ahead of time. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, we're going to turn to the members who are representing the recycling industry now. Let's start with Kristen Mitchell.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kristen Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association. ORA represents garbage and recycling companies, including collectors, processors, transfer stations, landfills, material recovery facilities all across the state of Oregon. I've been with the association for a number of years, and this has been an issue of interest to us for a long time. I would say I started really paying attention to it pre-National Sword, but that was what kind of raised the issue going forward, because we started in the conversations with state and local government and our processors and members when we saw the National Sword coming our way, which then turned into the Oregon Recycling Steering Committee conversations. I participated on that group, which was a really great opportunity to kind of vet all of the issues that need to be considered when we talk about modernizing Oregon's recycling system. I also served with Dylan DeThomas on the subcommittee for truth in labeling. ORA also had a separate bill for consideration on truth in labeling that then was moved into Senate Bill 582. So we had a role with participating in that conversation as well during the legislative session. So I applied because our position has been that the customer confusion we see with what goes in the recycling cart leads to the contamination that starts at the curb and moves to the material recovery facilities, which is very difficult to remove once it's in there, and then goes from there to markets. And the potential in that process is that there is material that then escapes from this system when it's transferred to other places that can cause what we see for environmental concerns in communities far, far away from us. And our position has been, you got to start at the top to clean up what the problem is. And our view of the problem is it starts with that confusion that customers feel when they're trying to make a decision, just like I do every Sunday night before I put out my recycling cart, of what goes in the cart, the blue cart, and what goes in the other one. So anything we can do, I believe, as a group to resolve those issues will be a great impact on the other issues that flow downstream. And I think if we all have the common goal of stopping misleading our customers, of starting to educate them on what's possible, that the end result is going to be something much better for our consumers, for the process, for the market, and for the environment. So thanks for having me on the group. I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Thanks very much, Kristen. Let's see, how about Dave Larmuth?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Dave Larmuth. I've been in the recycling and collection industry since 1998. I work for Recology, which is a regional company here in Oregon, and also is based in Northern California out of San Francisco. And so I'm the rate analyst, which means I'm primarily interested with how things get paid for, whether that's directly by our customers or indirectly by the system. And I should say Recology services most of Yamhill County, a corner of Polk County, and on the Oregon coast from Rockaway Beach north to Astoria. So we operate primarily outside the metro area for the chunk of Recology that I represent directly. As for why I applied for the committee, I live in a family of normals, as I call them, and they always ask me, and they call and they ask me, and they want to know that the things that they bought that say that they're recyclable are recyclable in our program. And depending on where they live in the country, that answer might change. Depending on where they live in Oregon, that answer might change. And Senate Bill 582, I think, will go a long way to help with some of those aspects. But I'm really interested in the education perspective of this work, whether it's on the shelf and the consumer aspect, whether it's in the home, under the sink bin, depending on your system, or at the cart or at the curb. And we get a lot of questions. Our customer reps take calls all day, every day. And a lot of those calls are about people who want to do the right thing, who are confused by what they're reading on packages. And I'm hoping that these efforts can help us find a system that works for everyone and is helpful at stopping these problems upstream of us. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Dave. Will Postgate, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Will Postgate. I'm with Garten Services. We are a nonprofit helping people with disabilities, mostly intellectual and developmental, be more visible in the workplace and in the community. So I'm proud to be working here. We have a number of divisions. One of them is a MRF. And I started here 9 years ago as the recycling manager, and 6 or so years ago got the chief operations officer position. So, but my heart has always been in recycling. And before I started working in the recycling industry, I was a recycler. I'm interested in the task force and applied to the task force because it affects the contamination rate affects my business drastically. So, you know, anywhere between 15 and 22% of what comes in from the carts is contamination. It's been proven, that's the number. You can't argue with me about it because I have proof. I see it every day. And a lot of that is plastic. It's everywhere. And I would like more consistency for the consumers. We need something very simple for the consumers. They need to be able to easily say, is this recyclable? Is this not recyclable? And recyclable to me is very simple. It depends on a market, and is it really recyclable? So that's why I'm here. And you know, it makes a big difference to us in our business because I really don't want to pay $500,000 a year in trash costs anymore. So there you go. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here and excited about it.
Thanks very much, Will. Nicole Jansen. Nicole?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Nicole Jansen. I am president of Denton Plastics here in Portland, Oregon. And we are not only a plastic recycler, but we make custom compounds out of plastics. So I've been in the business since 1994. And really coming to this task force, I applied because I felt like my past experience, not only with the Recycling Steering Committee, I have been past board of the Association of Plastic Recyclers and currently on the board of Resource Recycling. And with all of that experience and my work with the RSC board, I feel that I have a different lens that I can bring to the table than what I did on the task force, which our roots were originally in industrial and commercial recycling, but we have recently purchased a wash line, and that wash line is being installed actually within the next month. And so I'm going to be really taking a very deep dive into post-consumer recycling, and it all starts with labeling. So I'm excited to work with everyone here on this task force.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Okay, and then the last group that's represented in the task force are local governments. So we'll turn there next. Commissioner Kramer, please.
Yeah, thank you, David. Good morning, all. Steve Kramer, Wasco County Commissioner. I guess I would represent the counties. I was a big proponent at AOC, Association of Oregon Counties, to help get Senator Byers' 582 passed through support with AOC. Been in the, I spent 13 years with a hauler, and before that, 1987, my Lions Club received a grant from DEQ to put in a small recycling facility here in the great little town of Dufur, Oregon. And so I guess I would represent our rural folks. And why I've applied is pretty much what you've all said, is to help us with the end markets. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Tom Eggleston.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Eggleston. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm with the Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling Division. I'm the division manager. I would also put a disclaimer in that I'm dealing with a house full of quarantine today, so I might have my camera off for a while, even though I am a task force member, so I apologize for that. The reason I joined the task force, as a local government recycling program administrator, it's really important to work with our community members to kind of understand what's recyclable and what's not. And we're constantly having to discuss the issue of labeling on products and kind of identify the reasons why some products that may be labeled recyclable are not recyclable here in our region. So I think it's a really important discussion, and I'm really looking forward to being part of the solution. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom, and hope you and your family all come out of this okay. So there is a third local government member of the task force that was appointed and then withdrew. And so there's a new appointment, a replacement in the works. And as soon as that appointment has happened, we'll be very happy to welcome that person to the task force. The task force does have 13 voting members, and the law requires a majority of the voting members to constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. That means you need 7 voting members present, and you've met that standard, so a quorum is met for today. Before we go to the next agenda item, we want to do a quick introduction of the DEQ staff who are supporting this project. You've already met myself and Abby. And Alex Bertolucci, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. It's great to see all your faces this bright, early Monday morning. My name is Alex Bertolucci. I am the project manager for the Truth in Labeling Task Force. So I'll be your main point of contact with DEQ and helping move this process forward over the next few months.
Thanks, Alex. So any questions about the task force or any issues like that, please direct them to Alex. And last but not least, Cheryl Grabham. Cheryl?
Good morning, all. I'm Cheryl Grabham, and I manage the product stewardship team in DEQ's materials management program at headquarters.
Cheryl and I are both hanging out at the same mountain lake on this beautiful January morning. And actually, Cheryl is next up on the agenda because this is a pretty diverse group. Some of you are deeply steeped in the topics of labeling and contamination. Some of you a little bit less so. So we wanted to start with a little bit of level setting. And we sent out some background documents that we'll discuss after the break. Cheryl is going to share an overview of the related topics of labeling and contamination, why we care about them, and also how the recently adopted Recycling Modernization Act addresses those topics. And we will, if we don't have time for questions at the end, we will have time for plenty of time for discussions and conversation after the break. So Cheryl, take it away, please.
Great, thanks, David. I'd like to echo Abby's comments and thank each of you for your participation in this important effort. Confusing and misleading labels drive instability, as you know, in the recycling system, and this task force will help inform potential solutions to that problem. And I know many of you are very familiar with the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, so feel free to stretch, refill your coffee as needed while I go over some of the background here. But so I'll introduce the Act and provide additional information about elements of the Act that are most germane to the topic of labeling. I'll also touch on the closely related topic of contamination reduction and control. I'll spend a few minutes describing how DEQ will implement the Act, and then, as David said, we will have time for discussion later. In 2017, when China abruptly stopped accepting recyclables from the US and elsewhere, the global recycling system was significantly disrupted. Those disruptions made more visible some other factors challenging recycling. DEQ convened a recycling steering committee, which met for close to 2.5 years and ultimately found consensus on a recommended set of policies to modernize Oregon's decades-old recycling laws. And that consensus recommendation served as the basis of what eventually became Senate Bill 582, the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act. Under Senator Byer's leadership, the act was discussed and amended in its final form and was signed into law by Governor Brown in August. The act is designed to address several problems. To reduce public confusion, the new law provides more public education and creates one consistent statewide recycling collection list. To improve inequities throughout the recycling system, the Act sets up a system that better meets the needs of unserved and underserved communities and creates safeguards to prevent against irresponsible exports. To address unfavorable economics of recycling and historically unstable and volatile recycling markets, the Act requires producers to share responsibility with local governments and ratepayers, and thus internalize a portion of costs and remove market volatility from local governments and ratepayers' shoulders. To address the trend in Oregon of creating more garbage and recycling less over time, the Act will increase the quantity and quality of recycling as it becomes easier and more accessible across the state. It also creates incentives to use fewer materials and significant funding to reuse materials and prevent waste at the source. And while we currently have no guarantee of responsible recycling, the new law requires producers and recycling processors to ensure that material collected for recycling is actually recycled and in ways that protect the environment and human health. I'd like to elaborate on public confusion. A recent survey in the Portland metro region found that most residents believe they can recycle materials that the collection program actually doesn't accept. Here you see that 89% of people surveyed are somewhat or very confident that a frozen food box can be recycled, and 62% are confident that a paper coffee cup can be. Likewise, the majority of people surveyed were confident that square plastic tubs, plastic berry containers, lids, and plastic to-go containers can be recycled. There is both survey evidence and abundance of anecdotal evidence gathered by those who interact with the public that labels are a major source of this confusion, which can lead to contamination. However, labels could also contribute to contamination reduction, and that's the challenge which this task force is charged with evaluating. Contamination is material that the recycling system doesn't accept and often isn't designed to handle. It could be pure garbage, for example, garden hoses, for which there is no recycling option. Or it could be diapers or used hypodermics that pose serious health risks to workers in the recycling system. Contamination can also be material that is recyclable somewhere, but not necessarily in Oregon's commingled system, such as foam plastics or lithium-ion batteries. What are the impacts of contamination? There are 4 primary impacts. The first is the obvious impact on the workers in commingled recycling facilities who may have to remove contaminants by hand. The second impact is on the economics of processing facilities. Removing contamination makes the processing of mixed recyclables more expensive, sometimes so expensive that communities choose to drop materials from their recycling collection service. While processing facilities employ a number of techniques to remove contamination, no outbound bale is free of garbage. Third, contamination may impact the willingness of end markets to use recycled materials. When end markets receive contamination, it increased their costs. For example, a paper mill in Longview, a major end market for mixed paper collected from Oregon, stated that it is spending millions of dollars annually paying for feedstocks that are overly contaminated, and then spending millions more removing and disposing of those contaminants. This has made the use of recycled feedstock increasingly unfavorable from an economic perspective, and the company may consider reverting back to producing paper from virgin feedstock. A fourth major consequence of contamination is the negative impact mismanaged materials may have on the environment and the people downstream of our recycling processing system. The potential for mismanagement of materials when exported is noteworthy. While domestic end markets, such as a local mill, will screen out contamination and manage it safely and appropriately, the same is not necessarily true in other countries. This photo was taken by a journalist from Oregon who traveled to East Java. These plastics were mixed in with bales of paper that were sold to a paper mill there. The mill sorted the plastics out and dumped them in the neighboring countryside, where many would ultimately be burned. An article recently published in the journal Science Advances estimates that irresponsible exports may be one of the primary means by which the United States contributes to plastic pollution in the marine environment. And all of this is a failure of the plastics recycling industry. The photos I just shared were from bales of paper purchased from commingled processing facilities that had failed to adequately remove contamination. The Recycling Modernization Act will help to reduce contamination and the impacts of it. At a high level, the Act creates a shared responsibility model for recycling. Producers of covered products, which include packaging, printed paper, and food serviceware, will join and make payments to a producer responsibility organization, or PRO. PROs will fund necessary upgrades and perform other functions that will make Oregon's recycling programs more convenient, accessible, and responsible. The Act applies to both residentially and commercially generated materials. Producer costs will be scaled based on what materials they use and how much they sell into Oregon. Producer support will make it possible to create a new statewide recycling collection list that will make recycling programs consistent across the state. Local governments will maintain their current role overseeing collection and education in their communities and take on new responsibilities to expand collection services and carry out contamination reduction programs. Materials will be processed at facilities that meet new performance standards before being sold to end markets that can handle the materials responsibly. DEQ will oversee the recycling system and hold producers and other businesses accountable where necessary. A new advisory council made up of a range of system participants will review important elements and advise DEQ and the PROs. Now for some specifics that are related to labeling and contamination reduction. Section 58 of the Act repeals historic statutory language that required plastic packaging to be labeled with the old resin identification code created by the Society of the Plastics Industry. These are the familiar chasing arrow symbol surrounding a resin code and a resin abbreviation. This change by itself will do little to impact labeling, as more than 30 other states have similar requirements. But at least Oregon law no longer requires producers to use labels that have the consequence of encouraging contamination. Staying on the topic of labeling, Section 36 of the Act establishes this Truth in Labeling Task Force. Thank you for being here today. The Act creates a series of requirements that will further reduce confusion and contamination and reduce the impacts of contamination. There are at least 7 additional mechanisms in the Act for doing so, and I'll summarize these briefly. First, Section 22 of the Act requires the creation of a uniform statewide collection list for commingled collection programs. Having one consistent list for all commingled collection programs across the state is expected to reduce some confusion and with it, contamination. Second, Section 14 of the Act requires PROs to develop educational resources and promotional campaigns to promote the uniform statewide list, including requirements to properly prepare materials for recycling and education, and on the importance of not placing contaminants in commingled recycling collection. These consistent communication materials should also help to reduce contamination at the source. And third, can you go back? Thanks. Third, Section 28 of the Act requires local governments to implement a generator-facing contamination reduction program, drawing elements from a list of best practices. Section 13 of the Act requires the PRO to compensate local governments or their service providers for such costs, up to an annual cap. Fourth, Section 19 of the Act requires local governments to direct their commingled recyclables to facilities that are either permitted or certified, and Sections 37 and 38 establish permitting and certification programs, which include requirements to effectively sort and remove contamination. Fifth, Section 24 requires PROs to pay a contamination management fee to commingled processing facilities to compensate them for their cost of removing and disposing of covered products that are contaminants. Sixth, the Act establishes a system of joint responsibility and liability that is shared between the PROs and the commingled processing facilities. Both are required to direct materials only to responsible end markets and to provide transparency about final disposition of materials. These requirements will help to ensure that contaminated outbound shipments don't go to end markets that lack the legal protections and physical infrastructure to ensure proper management of contamination. And finally, Section 11 of the Act relates to the membership fees that PROs will charge their producer members. It requires these fees to create some kind of disincentive for contaminants by requiring the PROs to assess higher fees on average for materials not accepted for recycling in Oregon and lower fees on average for materials that are accepted for recycling. This may result in some design or material changes that further reduce contamination. So in all of these ways, the Act works to reduce the amount and impacts of contamination, which ultimately stems in part from labels that are confusing or even misleading. The Act also has some language that is specific to compostable packaging. Compostable packaging is not in the scope of this task force's charge, but there is some potential overlap, and other states have seen legislation addressing labeling of compostable products. So I'll make a quick mention of this topic. Compostable packaging and non-compostable packaging that inadvertently ends up in compost facilities pose an entirely different set of challenges. Many of these challenges are summarized in the document highlighted here, which was published by the compost facilities that accept food waste from Oregon. You'll find us on DEQ's website, recyclingact.oregon.gov, if you want to review it on your own time. Section 41 of the Act establishes a truth in composting policy, making it illegal for a collection program or compost facility to promote for acceptance any material that cannot or will not be effectively composted. Section 44A of the Act requires DEQ to study the issues involving compostability of covered products and the effects of covered products on compost systems, and submit a report and recommendations for legislation no later than December of 2026. Before I pivot to implementation of the Act, I want to mention one other element of the bill that has an important connection to labeling, but which is sometimes overlooked. Thank you. Most of the conversation involving recyclability claims on packaging and products related to whether the material will actually get recycled. However, there's another dimension. Generally speaking, the public believes that items labeled as recyclable or compostable are by extension preferable from an environmental perspective. That is, recyclability is often promoted and understood as an endorsement of a product's sustainability. However, over the last 20 years, DEQ became aware of several studies suggesting that some packages that are recyclable or compostable might actually have higher impacts on people or the environment, not because of recycling or composting, but because of what materials they were made of or how they were made. 4 years ago, DEQ commissioned a major research effort to more deeply probe these and several other popular material attributes. We evaluated 17 years of published life cycle assessments of packaging and food serviceware, finding thousands of comparisons of items with versus without these attributes. Next. And what we found is that the attributes often are very poor predictors of environmental impact. For example, among 520 different comparisons of recyclable versus non-recyclable packaging, when one looked at actual impacts such as climate change or air toxics, the comparisons were roughly evenly split. Recyclable options, shown in the green color, had meaningfully lower impacts in about 39% of these comparisons, but meaningfully higher impacts, shown in red, in about 44% of comparisons. And this isn't because of recycling, but rather because of what materials are used in the first place and how they're made. Similar results were found for compostable packaging, except that they slightly skewed more unfavorably, with compostable packaging more often than not leading to higher overall impacts, shown in red at 46%. In response, we have generally discouraged industry and others from using these attributes in promotions and labels. And in order to better understand which recyclable and compostable materials actually are lower impact, we've also encouraged producers to evaluate and disclose actual impacts as an alternative to the use of simple but misleading attributes. The Recycling Modernization Act advances this approach in 3 important ways. First, it requires the Environmental Quality Commission, or EQC, to establish consistent standards for the evaluation and disclosure of environmental impacts. Second, the Act creates an incentive for voluntary evaluation and disclosure as one of 4 mandatory eco-modulation criteria used to adjust the fees that producers pay to their PRO. And third, the Act requires the 25 largest producers to conduct such evaluation and disclosure for a small fraction of their portfolio of covered products. Again, DEQ believes that such evaluation is an essential element for transcending the greenwashing that sometimes accompanies claims of recyclability and compostability. So those are the highlights of the Act that relate to labeling and some of the problems that stem from confusing or misleading labels. I'd like to close with a short summary of key dates in the Act and opportunities for further engagement on these topics. Implementing these new programs will be a multi-year process. We have a little under 3.5 years to conduct a large amount of foundational work before the first PRO program plans are implemented in July 2025, including several studies, rulemaking, pilot testing, and creation of a new permitting and certification program, and more. In 2022, DEQ will begin to hire new staff dedicated to this program. The advisory council will be appointed and will begin meeting quarterly. And the Truth in Labeling Task Force report is due in June. In 2023 and 2024, we will complete several rulemakings, including material acceptance lists, the contamination management fee, standards for local government delivery of generator-facing contamination reduction, and standards for environmental impact and disclosure. PROs will form, and the first PRO program plans are due no later than March 31st, 2024. There are a few more studies due, and then by July 1st, 2025, individual producers must join a PRO. That's when PROs must begin implementing approved plans, including reimbursement to local governments and processing facilities, and their own operational responsibilities. Local governments will implement changes to collection programs, such as collecting materials on the statewide list. And recycling processing facilities must obtain a permit or certification. There will be formal opportunities where interested parties can be involved, such as rulemaking, the advisory council, and public comment periods related to PRO program plans and annual reports. There's a more detailed implementation timeline available online on our website, where you can sign up for our email list to receive job postings and other general updates. Thanks for listening, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Folks, we're actually a couple minutes ahead of schedule. So among the task force members, we might have time for 1 or 2 questions for Cheryl. So if you're a task force member and would like to ask a question, if you could please raise your hand. And if you could please do that electronically. I cannot see everyone, and some of you have your cameras off. So if you go like this, I won't see it. If you could raise your hand electronically, please. And I'm not seeing any. Alex, am I missing anyone?
Not that I'm seeing.
Okay, I guess, Cheryl, you left no unanswered questions. Or maybe just no one wants to ask them in public. We'll see. Okay, well, we'll go on to the next agenda item then. Thank you very much, Cheryl. So section 36, sub 10, allows the task force to establish rules necessary for its operation. Rules are not required, and it is up to the voting members to decide if you want rules, and if so, what rules you want. Adoption of rules does require a vote, but you can always amend and change these by another vote as you proceed. So DEQ reviewed rule language from some other legislative task forces. We took a close look at the specific requirements in section 36, and we drafted some rules as a convenience to you in the event that you do want to adopt rules. We sent these to you in advance last week, and our intent here was to provide you with a possible starting point. Our draft largely repeats what's already required by the law, and what is required by the law is shown in italics here. Perhaps the biggest addition we made is that the draft rules here specify the roles and functions of the chair, and that's under point 1, that the role of the chair is to preside over task force meetings, develop agendas, interact with agency staff providing support, if necessary, appoint subcommittee members, and serve as a spokesperson for the task force. So again, this is just a starting point for some conversation. At this point, I'd like to facilitate some conversation that could include proposed changes to these rules, a discussion about whether or not you want rules, and if so, a vote to consider adoption of the rules. We have 20 minutes for this agenda item. Don't be shy. Task force members, please raise your hand and I will call on you as I see your hands come up. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you for sharing this in advance. I did have a question about item number 5, recording. If there's any precedent with other task forces, commissions, boards within Oregon to do that. And then second question related is what would be done with the recordings versus are they just simply archival? Are they made available to the public? Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Abby or Alex, would you like to take that question?
Thank you, David. Good question, Dan. We do record our Environmental Quality Commission meetings, so that is common. We don't have to post them. We would have to make them available if anyone asked for them. The legislative hearings obviously are all recorded and made available. So it's fairly common practice. To my understanding, it is not required in any way. Partly, we thought it would be useful to record at least this one, knowing that we have two task force members that are not appointed, so they couldn't be here. So we wanted to make sure they could catch up. So it's an optional activity. If it's useful, we can have that and make them accessible, especially to the task force members or people who miss meetings.
Dan, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from other task force members. I guess I might then entertain a friendly amendment, which something to the effect of meetings of the task force shall be recorded and made available upon request. And if just to elaborate a little bit better, I fully respect the full disclosure and making things available to the public. From Ameripen's perspective, this conversation is likely to head broader than just what's happening in Oregon, and I wouldn't say have some concerns, but just interested as we're having policy discussions and what the policy is in other states, perhaps at the federal level, as this committee or task force explores all that just gives a little bit of cushion if task force members would be open to that friendly amendment.
So, Alex, would it be possible for you to get into these slides and edit them in real time?
Yeah, it might not be the most beautiful, but stand by and let me see what I can do.
And Dan's suggestion at the end of 5 was to add the clause "and made available upon request." While you're trying to get that to work, I think we had a question from Dave Larmuth. Dave?
Thanks, David. I had a similar question about what would be done with the recordings, how people would access them. And I guess I was concerned about them just being posted to the website. So I think the by request part works for me as well. Thank you.
Okay, Kristen.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond since Dan asked for some input from other task force members on this. I think his amendment is a good one. And I think it's important that we make this available because just based on the timing of these meetings, while I am hopeful there'll be 100% attendance at everything, I have a sneaking suspicion it may be difficult for some of us to make every meeting that is out there. And so it's helpful to be able to go back and see what we may have missed in the interim and making that open and possible for others, I think is important. I have some other comments on the rules, but I just wanted to support the potential amendment to the recording piece. Thanks.
Okay. Kristen, you said you had some other comments on the rules. Do you want to do those now, or do you want me to circle back in case?
Whatever your preference is. I think other people may be chiming in on this piece, so I can hold off.
So let's do this. Tom, Anya, Jenny, you have your hands up. Are they comments about recordings or something different? Anya says
recordings.
no. Jenny says yes. Tom, let's do Tom and Jenny, and then Anya will circle back to you and Kristen. So Tom, on recordings.
Yeah, I just I guess I understood the concern that I think Dave had from Ameripen, but I'm curious what others' concerns might be. As a local government representative, we record everything that we do in public meetings, so I think it's a benefit to transparency in the public, and also we have a lot of folks in the metro region, at least, that work in local governments and at the regional government level, and they're very interested in this work. So I think it'd be really valuable to have those recordings available for everybody, and having to file public records requests or make requests to DQ specifically for every recording just makes it harder to get a hold of. So that's my input.
All righty. Thank you, Tom. Jenny?
Yeah, mine's similar to what Tom was saying, but I believe that doesn't Oregon public meetings law require these meetings to be made available to the public anyway? I know that they have to be open to the public, but I thought my understanding was that you didn't need to put in a public meetings request or a public records request. for this. So that was just my question, David. Maybe you can clarify that. That was just my understanding of it.
Abby, Alex, Cheryl, you want to answer Jenny's question? Can you?
I'm unsure of that requirement.
We'll need to go back and review that requirement, but we will definitely post notes on the website. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah, thank you, David. I think the answer to that question is that we're a task force and only thing we're making is recommendations. We're not setting policy inside this committee. So I think that you know, we could do what we would like to do with the recording. That's up to us. I don't believe that it's a requirement of the meeting laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I will clarify here that if a recording is made, it does become a public record, and it must be made available to anyone to request it. That can either be done through the public records request process or a less formal process, which would be the result of Dan's friendly amendment here. Okay, so I think we're gonna maybe turn now to some other comments or questions. Let's start with Kristen. We'll come back to you after we hear from Anya. Okay, Anya?
Works for me. This was less about the rules, or potentially about the rules, and more just a general question about participation in these meetings. Observing a far larger list of participants than the task force members themselves. And I was just curious if you all could elaborate on who else is here and what that will look like in the future. And if that's something we should make a rule around.
So Anya, these are public meetings, and we, you know, they're open to anyone who wants to observe them. So you want to elaborate any further on that?
That's perfect. I had no idea. So I just wanted to double check that that's what it was. That's my assumption, but I wanted to clarify. So
today's agenda did not include what is sometimes common in meetings, which is a public comment period. And that was largely because you don't have your rules set up yet. And this is really more of a kind of an orientation process meeting. As the task force really dives into content, you might want to include an opportunity for public comment as well, so people who aren't on the task force can share their thoughts. Okay, so Kristen, let's come back to you.
Thanks. Just circling back briefly on the rules, if it's possible, it seems like it would just be easier to either do upon request or just post it on the website, because I agree, if there's any conversation about going through the public records request process, that just is a hurdle that I don't think people should have to overcome if they want to listen in or see what happens. And I think it makes it easier too for the agency to not have to be responding to individual requests. So that piece. On Anya's comment about who's attending, I think it would be helpful if in the future the meetings are set up so that when people sign in, they also sign in with their affiliation. Because if we were in a regular meeting room, that's kind of the sign up document that you do as you enter the room, as you say who you are and who you're with. And I think that's helpful for the group to see, you know, who's out there paying attention in case there are ways that we would like to interact with other people that may have more information. So just a couple comments on that. In the chair category, I just wondered if it's possible to amend that in a way. I know the statute says appointed chair, but for convenience in this committee and concerns about whether everybody's going to be able to attend every time, the possibility of establishing a vice chair so that you have somebody else to turn to in the event you don't have the chair available, who could also then potentially, you know, be a delegate to doing some of the tasks that the DEQ has suggested the chair's responsibilities may be. David, you spoke to the opportunity to comment. That was one of the questions that I had as well. Going forward, it would be, I think, appropriate for some way for there to be some sort of a comment period for members, whether it's, written comment or a short amount of time if they have something to raise, but I think that's an important part of the process. And I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, so let me try to juggle all of this here. So to confirm, DEQ does plan to prepare a written summary in notes version of meetings, and we'll post those so that they'll be available for a quick Cliff Notes review, so people don't have to listen to all 3 hours of the recording. With the friendly amendment from Dan, the recordings will be available upon request. I think the issue around public comment could be added to the rules, or the chair could simply make it happen when the chair sets the agenda. And we've heard now a request from several task force members to make sure that there is time for public comment. As for a vice chair, Kristen, I think you called it a friendly amendment, so we could do something here. We could make chair 1A, and 1B would be the task force shall elect one of its members to serve as vice chair to perform the duties of the chair when the chair is not available, or I don't know, something. I don't do legalese on the fly very well, but that work for you, Kristen, as a friendly amendment?
Sorry, I was nodding, but yes.
Okay. Okay.
David?
Yes, Sean?
Yeah, I have another one. And I agree that I think under the meetings category, that when it says meetings shall be open to the public, I think we should, add language that we will accept written comments from the public, as well as provide, a period of time during the meeting for public testimony. So I think it's important to have others participate. And so I agree with some of the others who have spoken about that participation. And I'm just wondering if we can just add that to that provision at the very end of 3 that just says that we'll accept written comments as well as oral testimony at each meeting.
Okay. Great. So I see Alex is writing this. The task force shall accept written comments. Written and got it. Okay. Okay. Jenny.
Yeah, I just wanted to dive into number 3 a little bit. I definitely support the public comment part. I would add that possibly we limit the time to 3 minutes per person. Otherwise, depending on the amount of comment we have, it could go on for quite a long time. So I think 3 minutes is probably a good amount. I was hoping that maybe we could discuss the time and place with a little bit more specificity to see if at this meeting we could decide when we are going to meet each month. Just some of us have a lot of travel and other meetings, and I think it would be great if we could really nail down a time each month when we are meeting, if everybody's open to having that conversation now.
Okay.
Well,
So
can I comment on the 3-minute limitation?
please, Sean.
Yeah, and I'm fine with limitation. I just think we should maybe leave that open-ended to the discretion of the chair. And so rather than put in our rules a specific time frame, if there's an expert out there on a specific issue that we need to hear 5 minutes, I'd hate to limit them to 3. And so I'm all for limiting if we have to, but maybe just leave that at the discretion of the chair based on the time.
As a practical matter, if you had 60 people who signed up to give public comment and you were required to give each of them 3 minutes, then your task force couldn't have any discussions of its own in a 3-hour meeting. So, okay. So there will be some time at the end of this meeting to talk about scheduling. I don't think I would recommend against putting the schedule in the rules, because none of you know what's going to happen, in March or April. Who knows? There could be another pandemic, and then you wouldn't be able to meet when you have to change your schedules because it's been locked into the rules. So But let's go back to number 3 here. We have the task force shall accept written comments. And Alex, I did hear also a request to say shall accept written comments and oral and oral comments at meetings, oral testimony, oral comments at meetings, and at the discretion of the chair. You don't need to say at the discretion, it's assumed if not specified. Dylan?
Yeah, I wanted to see if the group would be amenable to limiting the oral comment period. I was thinking the same thing that you were, David, in terms of if we do have 60 minutes of comments, that it would take up the entire time of it, you know. So and it doesn't necessarily have to be in writing. And I wanted to support the friendly amendment for the vice chair. Yeah, I and the rest of the comments were actually, my comments were addressed during them. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. So we've got just a couple of minutes left on this agenda item. If you're going to vote on these rules, we're going to need to do it pretty soon. So any last questions or comments here? Dan?
Yeah, thanks, David. Just to revisit the recording issue, I'm certainly not trying to add a layer of complexity for people who want to gain access to the meeting content, including the recordings. And if I heard correctly, that if we do record the meetings, they become a public record. I don't want to create a layer where it's difficult for somebody to get that. So can they make that request if we adopt this amendment just to DEQ staff, or does it just make better sense to post the recordings on the website and people can access it there?
So Dan, DEQ will figure out how to make these recordings available as administrative staff. We'll either post them or we'll send people emails. I don't quite know the exact mechanism yet, but they would be made available and convenient.
Great.
Without having to go through the public records request process.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, last call for any questions. Tom.
And David, I just want to confirm what you just said is in accordance with the current amendment, the way it's written on there right now.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, let's see if let's do a vote here. So for voting for this time, let's have the task force members vote via the chat feature. So if you go down under more and look at chat, and you can go ahead and send this to send your vote to, let's have you send your vote to Alex Bertolucci, please. So you can choose Alex from the drop-down menu. He's up at the very top. If anyone is having difficulty figuring out how to do this, please let me know. Otherwise, select Alex and type yes if you want to adopt these rules and no if you do not. And Alex will tabulate the results.
I see all yeses.
Okay, so congratulations, task force. You have just completed your first formal action. That was relatively painless. And hold on a second here. Right, okay, just wanted to remind you all that chats are also a public record. So in addition to whatever's being spoken here, whatever you send in the chat to anyone here, I believe is part of the public record. So just a friendly reminder there. All right, so now let's go on to the next agenda item, which is the election of a chair and now a vice chair as well. So in the pre-meeting survey we sent out, DEQ asked members if you wanted to nominate anyone for the role of chair. And look, we have a vice chair here as well. How cute. So we received several nominations and we asked the nominees if they would be willing to serve as chair. And two of the nominees agreed. And those are Anya Brandon of the Ocean Conservancy and Dylan DeThomas of the Recycling Partnership. However, Several other members of the task force told us that they wanted to see the membership roster before making nominations. So what we're proposing to do here is to first take additional nominations, if any of you want to nominate anyone else, then let anyone nominated either accept or decline, then provide anyone who accepts an opportunity to provide a short statement about why they'd like to be the chair. I think let's see, I think the way we'll do this is we'll take nominations for either chair or vice chair or both. And then anyone nominated can accept either or one or both. And then there will be an anonymous vote using the vote feature in Zoom. So any questions about the basic process? Okay, so let's first see if there are any additional nominations from the members of the task force.
David,
Yes, Alex.
I did get a message. Anya mentioned she would be interested in moving to vice chair.
Okay. Alrighty. Any nominations for other members? You can nominate yourself or you can nominate someone else. You just have to be a member of the task force. Okay, going once, going twice. I'm not seeing anything else here. So let's hear from Dylan and
David,
Anya.
we have,
yes. Oh,
we
Kristen,
have a
I'm
hand
sorry.
raised.
Sorry. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Cheryl. Kristen?
Sure. Thank you. I was curious if whether Senator Beyer would be interested in chairing the committee. So tossing his name out there, and I didn't ask him. So there you go.
Okay. Senator Beyer.
Well, I'm an ex officio member, non-voting member. So no, I think I'll let one of the other members chair. And besides, I'm going to be back and forth with the session going on. So I don't want to drag the committee if I get stuck in something else. But thank you for asking.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Kristen. Any other nominations? Okay, so this appears to be a non-competitive election. Dylan and Anya, would you like to say anything, or shall we just go to a vote?
I'd
Dylan?
love to say something if I could.
Please.
Thank you. So I just wanted to give a bit of a, well, that it's uncontested, I understand. I wanted to give a bit of a pitch to say, the role that I hope to play as chair and why I would like to be considered by my peers as part of the task force to be chair. Is that, the Recycling Partnership is a national nonprofit, but we're funded by industry, obviously. So that's big brands, retailers, and packaging producers of all types. That's plastics, but also paper and metal and glass and everyone really throughout the recycling value chain. And the role that we play as an organization is to help those companies and organizations to be able to reach their sustainability goals and to help play their proper role in the recycling system. Something that we often say is that we insist and assist these companies and organizations to help fulfill their responsibility in the system. And a particular position that I feel that I play at the organization as part of the policy arm of the Recycling Partnership, the Circular Economy Accelerator, is to do that insisting and assisting with those individual companies as they grapple with how to comply with both rules, but also their responsibility, again, to the system. I also have some expertise in the recycling system. I'm co-author of a report called The Review of Material Flow at MRFs and Reprocessors, which looked at different packaging types, the challenges that they have at both being processed, but also reprocessed, as well as details on bale yield and other technical attributes of the materials to make sure that they are, to Cheryl's excellent presentation, that they end up having the positive environmental outcomes that we all hope to come from recycling. And then lastly, I just think that as a member of the task force, being able to bring both a national perspective, but also an Oregon perspective as a proud Oregonian to this whole process. So thanks for giving me a couple of minutes to introduce myself, introduce my organization, and to raise my hand as chair of the task force.
All righty, thank you, Dylan. Anya, is there anything you'd like to add in support of your candidacy as vice chair?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to speak up and potential to serve as the vice chair. I was interested in a leadership position here, just given my deep technical expertise in plastics and recycling. I have a PhD in environmental engineering, in which I was studying ways to break down plastics, which was an incredible journey in and of itself, but involved, a really deep understanding of our current plastics and waste management system. I went from there to work at the federal level on policy for Senator Jeff Merkley of the great state of Oregon, working on plastics policy specifically. So I kind of married this deep technical expertise with, policy experience and background, and thought that would be a useful background and skill set to share with the task force. And I'm also, given my recent policy experience and continued policy experience, just have a really deep understanding of working with stakeholders across the recycling supply chain, and really interested and open to working with everyone on the task force here and also getting public comment. So happy to throw my name in the hat for vice chair.
David, you're muted.
Okay, someone has to do that at least once, and I'm glad it was me. So thank you, Cheryl. Okay, we're going to ask the task force members to take a vote now. We're going to do this the same way you did this before, to go to chat, to select Alex Bertolucci from the dropdown. And if you are in favor of the proposal to have Dylan DeThomas as chair and Anya Brandon as vice chair, please chat yes. And if you oppose, please text no. And Alex will tabulate the results, and we will need 7 yeses for this to be official.
I'm still counting, but we received at least 7 yeses.
Okay. Dylan and Anya, thank you very much. A little bit of extra work you've just picked up there, and we're looking forward to supporting you in your new roles. Okay, we are a few minutes ahead on the agenda, and what I would like to do is do a, let's see here, we're supposed to recap at 9:30. Okay, that's in 10 minutes. Let's take a slightly longer break. Dylan, would you be willing to join us in a breakout room for a couple minutes during the break here? Dylan, is that a yes?
Yes, I'm sorry. I said, of course. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Alex, if you could please send us off to a breakout room for a little conversation with the chair, and everyone else, we'll see you back here at 9:30. Thanks very much.
David, I won't be able to join you in that breakout room. It won't allow me to assign myself, but you and Dylan and Abby can go there.
Okay. And Okay, my clock says it's 9:30. Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of today's meeting. Let's see here. Dylan, are you with us?
Sure am. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we have enough people back here. A couple of people, cameras off, but we definitely have a quorum. So, okay. Dylan, you want to talk a little bit about the second half of the meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David, and the DEQ staff, and thank you all to the task force members. I appreciate you, your faith in voting me chair. So thank you so much. I'll do my best to serve, and I look forward to serving with my co-chair Anya. Again, thank you. A couple of quick pieces is one, I've asked DEQ to continue facilitating the second half of this meeting. The materials were organized and developed with DEQ as part of this whole implementation process that they're leading for the Recycling Modernization Act, and I've asked them to continue facilitation throughout the rest of this. And secondly, I was asking Alex if we could adjust the agenda to allow for up to 15 minutes of public comments at the end of the meeting. My request to the audience or the folks who are joining us today is that if you do wish to public comment, to do the same voting process that we did, is to drop down the menu, the chat, and message Alex. Thank you, Alex. Your intention to comment, and then he'll be able to see how long then each individual commenter will have, depending on how much interest there is. And that's it. That's what I had. So I was going to actually ask you, David, if you wouldn't mind continuing facilitation of the rest of this meeting.
All right, great. Okay, thank you, Dylan. Okay, so we're going to dive into some content now, starting with a quick look at the background materials that DEQ prepared for your convenience and a few questions on those materials that came in through the pre-meeting survey. And Alex is going to lead this conversation. As before, task force members, if you have questions or comments, please use the raise hand feature and I will call on you. Otherwise, Alex, please pick this one up. Thanks.
Yes, there are lots of tasks that I'm doing right now. So if I'm a little slow on seeing your message, apologize, and I will get to it. So let's talk about the background information that was sent out to the task force and is posted on the task force website. There's a lot there. We don't want to go too deep into the weeds on each one, but we can answer some questions and talk broadly about the information. I'll review each of the documents that was sent out and answer questions that came up from the survey or that may come up now. So first up is the document on California SB 343. So in 2021, the California legislature passed SB 343 to address the labeling of products and packaging. The law aims to ensure that claims related to an item's recyclability are truthful and that consumers receive accurate and helpful information about recycling products and packaging. SB 343 declares the use of the chasing arrow symbol surrounding a resin identification code, or any other mark or statement indicating recyclability to be deceptive or misleading unless the product or packaging is recyclable according to statewide recyclability criteria. I received no questions from the survey. Does anyone have any questions about this document currently?
And I'll just add that no questions today does not mean no questions in the future. So I suspect some of you might dig a little bit deeper into 343 in the future and come back with more questions. But if we have none at this point in time, we will move on to the second document, Alex. Thank you.
All right, thanks, David. Next up is the current recycling labels document. So this includes a table in this document. It comes from the Can I Recycle This report from the Consumer Information Program of the One Planet Network and the UN Environmental Program. The table was edited to remove the net assessment, both for space and to encourage the task force members to draw their own conclusions. However, the full report is on the task force website, and I encourage you all to take a look at that full report. There were some questions about the label's goals, or what the label's goals were for each of the labels, how well they accomplished these goals and at what cost to consumers. So that's a very large question, and wasn't able to take that fully on before this meeting. However, there was one question to a specific label, the on-pack recycling label, or OPRL, and how does this acknowledge local infrastructure variations? The OPRL scheme is very similar to the US-based How to Recycle label, in that there are set limits for items to get a label or not, depending on how much of the community recycles that item. There's also a check locally option, which wasn't shown in the table, but there's many of those options, the same that the How to Recycle label has. So that was the question that we had there. Were there any other questions on the labeling?
Kristen.
Thank you. Alex, I'm sorry, which document did you say this pulls from, the ones that are listed on the group or on the page?
It's, I believe it's linked in that document as well. It's the Can I Recycle This report.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, it covers a large number of different labels.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess I have some other comments, like on the other considerations piece, the ASTM, which just strikes me as remarkably confusing, and whether there's some pathway to being engaged in resolving some of that confusion. I mean, that's probably a down the road question, but one of the questions that I have, and also on the FTC information, what's happening in that group, I think is going to be relevant, or could be relevant to our discussions as well. So, hopefully we can find ways to track that material too, but this is a good start. It's interesting that 39 states before 2022 were required to have the chasing labels with the resin identification code. So, we've got some work to do nationally to resolve, I think, some of those concerns, but thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
Anya?
I had a question about some of the rationale, especially for the Woolsworth recycling labels, and getting back a little bit to the discussion that we had about material attributes during the really informative background section. Are material source labels, is that something that is, kind of like that Woolsworth recycling label that has, a plus for transparency regarding the source of materials specified? Is that considered in scope for this task force to assess? Or is that something that we should discuss as a task force?
I'll try to take a first answer to that, and Abby and Alex, if you want to jump in here. So looking at section 36 of the Act, the task force is charged under sub 3 to, quote, study and evaluate misleading or confusing claims regarding the recyclability of products made on a product or product packaging. The study must include consideration of issues affecting accessibility for diverse audiences, unquote. So that's your legislative charge. That's what you have to do. The task force could choose to explore other issues and dynamics here, so long as doing so doesn't happen at the expense of your primary charge in the Act. Abby, Alex, would you add anything to that?
Nothing for me. I think you did that well.
I agree, and I'll just warn the task force, I think we're on a, as I might have said twice earlier, a very constrained time frame, so we could map it out and see what there's time for.
Thanks, Abby. And in addition to that, I'd add that the task force, this goes without saying, but I'll say it, the task force is not the legislature. And the task force could choose to limit itself to this fairly narrow but very complex lane of recyclability. And then someone could take that recommendations from the task force and plant it in a piece of legislation that is broader and addresses additional issues. Okay, any other questions or comments on that second document? Kristen?
Yeah, I apologize. I realized I was just commenting on the third document. So just my jumping ahead, I apologize again. So just, I thought the Holy Grail intelligent sorting piece is an interesting one. I know it's in testing stages as well, but I guess questions to that would be, as you have already raised, how much is this going to cost in the system and other information? And I guess that raises an overall point on the background documents that are posted up. If it would be possible to share the underlying research links for those documents. There were a number of documents that I was reading for additional background that have a brief acknowledgement of where the research came from, but no link to the actual research that was used to draft the document. I'm thinking of a couple of them, and I can point them out to you later, but I think that just going forward. So anyway, I'll try and stay on the right track. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Kristen. And some of the background documents are also posted on there's some additional information there on the website that I encourage folks to check out as well.
Any other questions on this second piece? If not, we'll move to the third. Alex?
All right, so we're moving on to the recycling laws document. This document covers current recycling laws, such as chasing arrows and recycling identification code requirements in 36 states. This document also covers other labeling or EPR bills in Washington, Oregon, Maine, North Carolina, Alabama, and California. There's a small amount on flushable wipes. The document ends with some information, like Kristen was talking about ASTM standards for the use of the solid triangle around the resin identification code instead of the chasing arrows, and the Federal Trade Commission's Green Guides update. The Green Guides provide advice on environmental marketing claims, how consumers are likely to interpret claims, how producers can substantiate them, and how marketers can qualify their claims to avoid deceiving customers. There were a couple questions that came in from our pre-meeting survey. So the first question, that was, do all 36 states listed requiring chasing arrows and the resin identification code to appear together on covered containers? And adding to that, of the 36 states that require chasing arrows, how many actually enforce that requirement? So to that first question, do they require it together? Typical language used in states was from the Society of the Plastics Industry, now the Plastic Industry Association. And the recycling abbreviation code says all rigid plastic bottles and rigid plastic containers sold in the state shall be labeled with a code that indicates the resin used to produce the rigid plastic bottle or rigid plastic container. It goes on to say the code shall consist of a number placed inside a triangle and letters placed below the triangle. It then describes the triangle to be the chasing arrows. So yes, most of the laws require them to be together, both of those. And then that second question of, has there been any enforcement? There wasn't any enforcement that we could find from the state level. However, there have been some lawsuits, mainly in California, around recycling labeling over the past few years, but none of those were initiated by the state itself. Are there any other questions on this document?
Kristen.
Alex, just to follow up on the lawsuits you refer to, mostly in California. I think there are also some in Canada related to the labels as well. If you're referring to the Keurig is the one that I'm thinking of, but I don't know if there are other examples, and it would be potentially helpful to have that information for this group from a consumer protection standpoint of what sort of efforts are being made on the part of some groups to ensure that consumers have correct information on labeling and the legal pathway through a lawsuit. Thanks.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, we can look in that for the future.
Any other initial comments or questions about the recycling laws document? Okay, at this point, not seeing any others. So Alex, to the fourth document, please.
All right, lastly, we have the potential menu of options. This document lays out 5 potential options for moving forward. There was a fair amount of discussion in the survey about these options. The options were used mainly as building blocks to rebuild other options, but there was no questions put forward or new ideas per se. And we'll talk more about this, these building blocks in a bit.
Yeah, so for those of you who participated in the recycling steering committee or followed that process, you may fondly remember the analogy of Legos. It looks like perhaps we have the Lego pieces in that document. As Alex said, no one initially suggested any other Lego pieces, although there was a lot of interest on the part of some members in the survey in combining those Lego pieces into different fantastic creatures or pieces of architecture or whatever you want to call them, whatever you do with Legos. Any initial questions or comments about the options document? Much of your conversation in the next couple of months will be about those options, I'm sure. So this is just about clarifying questions at this point. Okay, not seeing any. Alex, there was also some survey, some additional survey feedback.
Yeah, so let's turn to those survey responses now. Just wanted to add another dog picture in there. So we asked in the pre-survey, please share what labeling related topics you most want to discuss during the task force. These are the high-level themes that came out of their question. So first off was understanding what other states, especially California, are doing. It was a very common theme that came up continuously. Who's liable for mislabeling? What does recyclable mean? And this question was around curbside versus drop-off versus what's accepted in different communities. Some of that will be addressed with the Recycling Modernization Act and the statewide list. So there won't be those variations between communities with that list. But as the task force moves forward, keeping those changes in mind will be important. Consistent, accurate, and reliable labeling for all recycling users. These responses are good to go back to the actual law, talking about how we must consider considerations of issues affecting accessibility for diverse audiences. So keeping that front and center was good. And then several people asked about compostable versus degradable versus recyclable packaging labels. The law charges the task force with evaluating the topic of recyclability claims and not so much with some of these other claims as compostable, degradable. So those could potentially be explored under a separate study that's required, as David talked about earlier, under Section 44A of the Recycling Modernization Act. Compostability and degradability claims could also be the subject of legislation, and this task force could explore them, but not at the expense of the statutory charge, which is to address claims of recyclability. Is there anything anyone wanted to address on any of these or questions they had on these themes? All right, keep going for the survey. The next question was, after reading the draft proposed menu of options, do you have other ideas you'd like added? As I mentioned, there was no new items. There was some move around and hybrids created. But the big question that came up time and time again was to align or not to align with California and their labeling law, with them being just right below us, and then how we would do that specifically. Does anyone want to throw any comments behind this from the survey?
We did have a cute photo of a dog in a Shakespearean outfit, looking somewhat Hamlet-ish, but it was copyrighted, so we couldn't use it. Senator Byer.
Yes, thank you. One of the questions I have as we explore this is how realistic is it for Oregon to be that much different than California? I mean, it's in terms of national product packaging, when you look at, 40 million people versus 4 million in Oregon, 6 million, a little over 6 million in Washington. Can the tail really wag the dog? That's kind of the question on that. And I don't know the answer to that one. I keep going back and forth on that, but I'd appreciate more discussion on that.
All right, point noted. And we have a little bit of time now if people want to pick up that topic. In the meantime, Dan and Nicole have their hands raised. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, David. And I completely appreciate this hopefulness for the group to look at what's happening in California and if and how to align that with whatever Oregon might move forward. I would also mention, I'm sure many are familiar, Washington State to the north is looking at this exact same issue. Remains to be seen, how that may play out this year. And of course, from Ameripen's perspective, multiple other states now taking up this issue as well. I understand more of a focus at the regional level on what's taking place on the West Coast, but again, more of a comment than anything. Look forward to the focused conversation on this issue.
Thank you, Dan. Dylan, did you want to jump in with a, no? Okay, Nicole.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment when we're looking at aligning or not aligning with 343, that one of the concerns that has been in back discussions, the couple of their boards I'm on, is how do you deal with emerging markets? So, it's not just the low-lying fruit of, PET and polyethylene that's already been collected, but the idea of after the national sword, we had a lot of materials go out of our bin. And there's materials like number 5, polypropylene, that is in the majority of packaging out there. And how do we deal with any type of emerging market if we are going to align with 343? Because I think they're struggling with that same issue.
Thank you, Nicole. Dave Larmuth.
Yes, thank you. On the along these same lines, I guess my concern is similar to what we have for the potential end of daylight savings time. If Oregon and Washington are connected to what happens in California, and because of some specifics in the California law that maybe we wouldn't have put into an Oregon law, it's held up in lawsuit after lawsuit, or it keeps having to go back through to get whittled around. It could push the implementation date far out into the future. And so that's while it's fine to have legislation that might be similar, but an actual link, I think, could be a problem for a lot of folks.
David, do you mind if I chime in?
Yes, Dylan, please.
I really think that obviously considerations around California are critical to, the task force job is to figure out what that is. The component that I think that as a task force that we'll have to grapple with is the determinations of recyclability are very different for what is, what is outlined in 343 and what the Recycling Modernization Act is currently working on in implementation. And I feel like we need to, again, as Oregonians and leaders, need to grapple with that, as well as the, how functionally that type of alignment could occur. So I guess it's not a question, but again, more of a comment. And I think, something that structurally I expect we'll spend a lot of time on in the next several meetings.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Kristen.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. We have to pay attention to what's happening in California. I still think it's early days. I know that there'll be the potential of amendments and changes and potentially lawsuits, things going forward with the California legislation. So it certainly bears watching and certainly bears understanding. But I don't think that we should feel required in some way to align to a California solution. Yeah, they're the big dog to the south of us, and they do affect the markets in some ways. But we've done Oregon-based solutions before, and maybe we can take what they've done and tweak it for the better for a larger group that could be a model that they may choose to follow us versus us following them. I think that this group has a lot of opportunity to talk about ways to make things better that actually work and potentially less prescriptive for our producer partners and more informative for our local communities and our citizens, which is still the goal, right? How do we stop confusing our customers and give them information about what is recyclable in their community? And I have a great deal of faith in the innovative nature of our producer members and the things that they can do. So if we keep that in the forefront of our efforts, yes, California may have a role in that, but let's not take California's example as what's the best choice for Oregonians. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Athena.
Yes, thank you. I think as for the question around whether to align with California or not, just to provide some perspective from a retailer, you know, some of the packaging that we, for instance, purchase, we have control over, but a lot of the packaging that we purchase is packaging that's developed in different states or even different countries that are looking to align with rules across state boundaries, I would assume. And you know, that's where we're often faced with a lot of confusion. We have a lot of packages that from a variety of perspectives and analytics look really good, but they say compostable all over them. And we've worked really hard not to purchase products that say compostable on them because we know that our customers get really confused about that. And we think that that would promote them putting those products in the compost bin at their house. So just some practical like retail experience to share there about you know, aligning with a larger group that would help leverage decision making at the producer or at the package producer level, I think is really an important perspective to consider as we think about California.
Thanks, Athena. Jenny?
I think Athena brings up a really interesting point, in that one of the differences between Oregon and California is our infrastructure alone between what we have for hauling, recycling, and composting. And so while it's certainly appealing from a producer standpoint to have similar legislation, particularly along the West Coast, it's also important to understand that the infrastructure that's available in each state is not the same. And definitely there are large differences between Oregon and California. And so I think that is something that we have to keep in mind, particularly as we're defining what recyclable means. It's not the same in Oregon as it is in California, just because of the differences in available infrastructure and the way that our hauling system, franchise system works, and keeping in mind some of the up and coming options in Oregon. If you take into account a Ridwell, they're trying to redefine what recycling means. And so, you know, there's a lot happening here that I think makes us different from other states. And so we should certainly keep that in mind when we're looking at making Oregon specific legislation or recommendations for legislation.
All right, thanks, Jenny. Any final initial thoughts or comments or questions about the survey results that Alex shared with you? Okay, if not, we've got 1 hour left. And Alex, just confirming that so far nobody has made a request for public comment in today's meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so unless something comes in very imminently, we're gonna dedicate the full hour here to talking about roadmap and next steps for this task force. So there's a quick look at a calendar right there. Your report to the legislature is due in 4 months and 1 day. And so we're assuming here, and we'll have some conversation around that today, I'm sure. We're assuming, though, that this task force's work is going to fall generally into 2 broad phases. There will be a phase of information gathering and deliberation. And you can probably devote February, March, and part of April to that. But assuming that the task force members want to review at least one and possibly more than one draft of the legislative report, and you're going to have to vote on that report in order to officially transmit it as the task force's recommendations, whoever is actually writing the report is going to need some time to write it, and they're going to need to know what the report needs to say. So our assumption is that by April, this task force should be into what we're going to call the second phase, which involves report preparation and review and revisions. And we're assuming there will still be some deliberation and discussion in that second phase, but at a certain point, it will be too late to begin exploring new ideas or new options. So as a practical matter, the task force members are going to need to identify the options you want out on the table in fairly short order. And in the survey, most of you expressed a willingness to meet 1 or 2 times a month. So you can imagine then how this work will be paced. We also have to recognize that February is Oregon's short, even numbered year legislative session. And that's going to be especially challenging for some of the task force members, including Senator Beyer. So we'll do our best to accommodate that. So with all that as context, we want to invite some conversation for the next hour, primarily to inform the chair as he sets agendas for the next meetings involving next steps. We can go to the next slide, please. Some questions for you. What topics do you want to explore? We've already heard some of those and we've recorded those. Are there any guest speakers or organizations that you want to hear their perspective? Is there additional research you'd like to see? In terms of a meeting schedule, is once every 3 or 4 weeks going to work for you, generally speaking? And what does the process for moving forward towards a report look like? That's not so much about February and March, but just looking ahead. Dylan shared with us during the break that he has a lot of questions about how the report will be prepared and how it will be reviewed. So if you have some initial feedback you'd like to share around that, this is your time to do it. So long list of questions there, a lot to do in the next 4 months. I'd like to open it back up to any and all of the task force members for your initial feedback on these questions, starting with Dylan.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I'm keen. You know, as I mentioned on my side conversation, you know, that timeline we had on the previous slide is a really aggressive one. And as someone who has been a part of writing a number of reports, you know, I recognize the challenges that we'll face. You know, I very much would love to have an aggressive meeting schedule if we can have one. You know, whether it's every other week or every third week, to be able to dig in and really just quickly compile that list of topics and that list of guest speakers as fast as we can, so that way we can get to the hard work of negotiating through those options and coming to consensus or coming to at least a majority agreement as to the direction we want to go. I'm keen to be able to get as a group to those points. So would love again conversation around those topics and those guest speakers in particular.
Thank you, Dylan. Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, thank you, David and Chair. Is there a comprehensive list of misleading or confusing claims floating around somewhere? I'd like to see that if that's, because that's our main charge of this group. So that would be very, very helpful for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Alex, do you have a quick answer to the Commissioner's question?
Not that I know of, but we'll see what we can find and get you some information there.
we do have a couple of examples we've been gathering over the last several months, but a comprehensive list would be pretty long and pretty difficult to keep current. See what we can find. Senator Byer.
Yeah, I think one of the points that would be helpful for me to understand better is whatever we establish, how will that be enforced? Is it enforced on the retailers, or is it enforced on the producers themselves? And how will we get at that? And I keep thinking of, for example, a jar of pickles that's sold, through Walmart, goes through their distribution center in up on the Washington border, and they service 4 states out of that. How does that work? Will we assume that they will adopt the Oregon standard and put that on all of their labels? Similar to what happens with recyclable pop cans or bottles, or how will that work? I just think there's a discussion there. And how does the seller interface with the pros when we establish those, where the responsibility is going to be on the producer organizations and how they enforce through their fees or whatever to their membership? Just understanding how that connection will work, I think is important as we try to develop policy. I suppose one option for a producer is just not to sell their product in Oregon, if that's the issue, but I'm not sure how all that works. So a discussion on that would be helpful to me.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Points noted. Dylan, do you have a follow-up to this or a different topic? Different? Okay.
Yeah, it's different. And David, I'll message you if I want to be bumped to the top. I'm happy to be in line with the rest of the queue with the rest of the speakers.
Okay, we'll keep you there until you tell me otherwise then. Nicole.
Yeah, so I'm changing subjects here to go to kind of topics to explore and guest speakers in the future. I know California also has used the same guideline, but I think for people here, it might be helpful to know about the design guidelines that the Association of Plastic Recyclers have for packaging. A lot of brands are using that, and it's been discussed about it becoming a guideline for across all packaging. I know the SPC, Sustainable Packaging Coalition, also uses it with APR. And if we could have someone from the APR discuss that, because as we know, the labeling, it's not just a question of access, it's also a question of what the package is made of. Thank you.
Okay, points noted. Thank you. Kristen?
Thank you. Speaking to the question of enforcement and how other states are doing things that are state specific, I think we should take a look, or if we can, to 2021's Oregon House Bill 2344 related to the flushable wipes and the requirements that have been put in place for labeling for materials sold into Oregon, and what that looks like and what the potential enforcements are in case there's a possibility that there might be something that we could take from that group and look at in this group when we're talking about Oregon specific labeling language. I think would be helpful. I agree with Nicole on APR coming and speaking with us as well. I think Steve Alexander has done some work on that, and I think we had him possibly speak to the Recycling Steering Committee back when we were meeting then, so there may be some helpful information in that piece. I'd like to hear more about it from a consumer protection standard, as I mentioned earlier. So the lawsuits related to the Keurig, if there are other similar lawsuits out there about misleading the public in purchases or decisions they may make related to recyclability. And that's what I've got just briefly. So thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Sean Miller, you were involved in that wipes, the negotiation around the wipes legislation. Do you want to speak about that briefly, or come back to it?
Yeah, I will, and I think it's a good discussion point that Senator Byer brought up on, kind of who's liable for this. And I know, and I brought to the attention during the debate when this particular labeling bill was introduced last session, just that very issue from a retailer's perspective of how, can a retailer be held liable because the way it was drafted for someone else's packaging. And so, possibly facing lawsuits, for the packaging. Now, I know you could follow the definition of producer. The bill as originally drafted did not follow that hierarchy of that definition. So I know that's just an issue I brought up. As for the wipes bill, that did, does define who the covered entity is under that bill. And I know from a retailer's perspective, we did work with the other proponents of the bill to talk about some of the products that we provide, let's say, whether it's private label or brand label, that are, made by other manufacturers. And so again, the example is, again, there's a product, and then there's oftentimes a private label product that a retailer will also have. And a lot of times we contract to a manufacturer the responsibility for that labeling, for the packaging, and there was language that was built into that bill specific to those scenarios. So yeah, I think we were supportive of 2044. It did kind of clear up who would be responsible for that packaging. But again, I think to Senator Byer's original point, there's a lot of issues around, enforcement. I think the concern of a private right of action is something that we will bring up, because however this is designed, we just don't want to face lawsuits, which are very difficult to and expensive for, let's say, other people's packaging, or again, to the point earlier on just consumer confusion, and then obviously then we're held in the middle of some lawsuits. So I think those are all areas that we would like to discuss and make sure is clear.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Dylan?
Yeah, I was going to suggest, as part of the misleading claims conversation as a topic, is to bring in the Metro study of recyclability messaging, and potentially a speaker on that. I think that's a extremely relevant research for us to kind of digest as a truth and labeling task force. And I really appreciated the commentary from Sean on the flushable wipes process. That was super helpful.
Thank you, Dylan. Dan.
Yeah, thank you, David. I won't belabor the producer discussion, other than to say it needs to happen, and who's the responsible party, whether it falls into Oregon's existing new RCA law or if it takes a different path, but definitely a conversation that needs to happen as we explore that. In terms of guest speakers, I would also take it a step further. Steve Alexander, APR, would be great. I would suggest maybe giving some consideration to someone directly from Green Blue SBC for the How to Recycle program that can speak to that, and maybe Nina Goodrich or maybe someone else, but I think that's worth exploring as a speaker. The other one I wonder about, be curious to see what others think as well. I know that Oregon's changed its law in terms of their chasing arrows in combination with the resin identification code. If there's some value in hearing from someone at ASTM regarding the resin identification code and understanding, maybe from both their perspective as well as recyclers' perspective, is the RIC even needed? I hear anecdotal information from my members on both sides. Some say it is needed for the purposes of recycling, others say it's not. So maybe to explore that at some point if it's of value to this conversation. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Dan. And I'll just mention on the topic of whether the RIC, the resin identification code, is needed, separate from the question of a triangle or a chasing arrows, is as part of implementation of the Recycling Modernization Act, DEQ is considering materials for the Uniform Statewide Collection List. And in some initial conversations we've had, there are some people advocating that we should have a statewide list that is defined by resin identification code. So the question about whether or not resin identification code would be useful in the future can be informed by perspectives from out of state, but also that Section 22 of the Act, which will be under development concurrent with the meetings of this task force. Okay, Tom.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'd be curious to learn more about California's Senate bill and try to get a little bit more into understanding about how they are selecting items that would be included in their truth and labeling standards. It looks to me, based on the information Alex provided, I haven't dug in deeply, it's based on accessibility across the state of California. And I know one of the things I really appreciate about SB 582 is that we're defining recyclability based on some real criteria that have meaning behind them, not just that they're collected. So just because Starbucks cups or disposable coffee cups might be collected in 60% of the jurisdictions in California doesn't mean they should be in our recycling system. So I think that's an important component, and really try to unpack that and maybe learn more about what materials are in California's waste comp studies currently. It looks like they haven't really defined that yet, but I'm sure there's some information maybe for someone from Cal Recycle that can help us understand some more about that.
All right. Dan, did you put your hand back up, or is it?
I did, just briefly. That's a great point Tom makes, and there is some information available. I'm happy to share it with it's this California Statewide Recycling Commission. I might not have that exactly right, but their work is ongoing, but they do have some data available as to how they have formulated what many suspect will be the leader for Cal Recycle to determine what will be on that state's list when they conduct their material characterization study. But there's some good information from the commission in California that can sort of signal what they're looking at anyway.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Kristen?
I think one of the documents I saw that's also listed on the website that might be worth a bit of a deeper dive is the Recycling Pulse research that is in the background documents that was done by the Shelton Group that speaks, I think, fairly specifically to some of the issues about consumer use of material and the number of consumers that review labels before they choose to recycle things. I thought it was an interesting statistic that was noted there that said 22% of the time consumers say they always look, but 45% of the time they say they sometimes look. So if you combine those for 67% of the time, we have some pretty big opportunities to correct poor recycling decisions by cleaning up poor and misleading labeling. So I'd be curious about more information about that. There are some references, at least one in that document, to what Dan referred to as the how to recycle label. I think there's a lot of concern amongst some of us about the how to recycle label, since that also does this sort of 60-40 number of 60% of the time you can recycle it, 40% of the time you can't, but it still makes the label. And the group that participates in that has, I think, under a 20% number of participants nationwide in that information. So I think that that's interesting to hear what they're doing. In the same way, I think it's interesting to see what's happening with the FTC green guides and what the effort is going to be at that part. Because I think if all of us had an option in this world, we'd have some national legislation that speaks to these things. So we wouldn't have these state by state issues, but that's not where we are now. So I think the best we can do as a group is push forward what we think the best solution is for Oregon, and hope that that solution is one that is adopted going forward on a bigger scale, and maybe push from the West Coast to the East Coast to see if we can come up with a solution that makes sense nationwide. But we got to start here because that's the hand we're dealt. Thanks.
And Kristen, you got a virtual thumbs up from Dan Felton on that comment. So on to Anya.
Yeah, first and foremost, just echoing the aspirational goal of getting to federal regulations that kind of puts us all out of business a little bit if they end up being good enough. And I think the other thing I wanted to not lose sight of, which I'm sure we'll discuss, is just really hammering in on that definition of recyclability and how, I think that is a really unique opportunity for Oregon here to establish some best practices and thinking about, what are we basing that on? Is it this like 60-40 thing? Is it, true compatibility with circularity? And, how do other areas of emerging concern, thinking about chemicals and other things like fit into that definition, and making sure that we're kind of establishing something that meets the moment, but also could hold up over time.
Thank you, Anya. Will Postgate.
Hi, thank you. I just want to make sure, and I'm pretty sure it won't get lost in this group, but I want to make sure that we keep in mind that anything that we call recyclable also has a market to it, right? So there's a lot of things that can be recycled if we somehow collect them and have a full 53-foot trailer full of them. You can get it recycled, but that doesn't mean that you can be compensated for what it took to get that product, right? There is no market for it. So I want to make sure that that is as important as the word recyclable, because there aren't many things that actually have a market when you're talking about recyclability, and creating a market is very difficult. And public drop-off centers are nice for certain things, but what's the cost of that, and how much greenhouse gases are we using to have everybody go to one drop-off thing to put their yogurt cups or their these things in? The net benefit or net cost of recycling that DEQ is working on is awesome and an amazing piece of work that is going to be a heavy burden to figure out, but I like that way of thinking. But there has to be a market for things to be called recyclable and get everybody involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Dylan.
To build on what Will was just commenting on, and just thinking about the determination of recyclability. Sorry, my cat is going to participate in advance of the canine slides. Is to maybe have DEQ staff to present on the determination of recyclability in the Recycling Modernization Act, and some of the implementation processes that you're underway for planning could be a benefit to the group, and address some of the concerns that were outlined by some of the Truth in Labeling Task Force members in this commentary period.
Okay, point noted. We have quite a bit more time here. If there are other topics you'd like to explore, still time to elevate them. I've heard a couple of recommendations involving guest speakers. We could also spend some time here if you want to share some feedback around meetings. In the survey, we asked about frequency of meeting, and most people said around once every 3 to 4 weeks works best for them. Dylan, in his newfound responsibilities as chair, said maybe once every 2 weeks. We could get some feedback on willingness and frequency of meetings. Full group subcommittees might be an option, although you don't have a whole lot of time here. And if any of you would like to share some comments around looking ahead into April and May, the report process and how you would like to engage in that. We have some time for a conversation there as well. Okay, got a whole bunch more hands up here. Let's start with Anya.
Yeah, the last topic I would be interested in raising would be some of that material attribution and where source materials are coming from, and how it relates to recycling or not. I just think, some of the labels that we've seen establish, really clear consumer education on plastic sources, regarding recycled content or other things. And I think that is an interesting opportunity for us to make recommendations as well. Regarding meeting schedule, one thought or suggestion I have, just given our really shortened time period, would be if there's opportunities perhaps for sub-group meetings or working group meetings in advance of other meetings, below the threshold of a quorum, perhaps, to make, no voting, nothing, just, working in smaller formats to bring information to report back to the whole task force. Maybe alternating with task force meetings, something like that. But that would be an idea to raise.
Okay, thank you, Anya. Kristen?
Hi, a couple things. So first, on more topics, I would love to see more information on labeling innovations, possibilities that are out there. I believe we heard during Senate Bill 581 or 582 testimony from some groups that talked about different ways to do labeling. It seems to me it might have even been related to QR codes, which also makes me think of a potential speaker that Recollect, which is a group, or at least that I'm familiar with along the West Coast, that provides information about recycling programs, of what's actually available in communities that you can find fairly quickly. So combining that possibility of innovation with a group that is already existing out there to do that kind of information for consumers, I think would be interesting to this group if we're talking about innovations. And I think we should be with our packaging and producer components, since they are the great innovators of all of this and are capable of making changes remarkably quickly, as we know, to packaging, and have done so in so many environmentally beneficial ways. So let's see if we can take advantage of that and combine those conversations. I don't have the name of the person who testified during 582. I raise that as an example. I don't know if, but we can find that obviously. But I don't know if other people have suggestions about that kind of innovative packaging and labeling conversations. When it comes to the, did Dylan raise his hand and say, I've got something? Adam, good.
Yeah, I was just there are some local folks that are working on some innovative labeling technologies that I think we could easily compile as part of that. Kristen, was what I was.
Great. I think that would be fascinating and directly on point to, I think, what this group is trying to do. As for meetings, I think as a general rule, if we could not make it on Mondays or Fridays, that's generally easier for people when it combines with whatever their life that the tiny life we have left during COVID. If there's the possibility to put the meetings in the middle there, it might be easier for people to really be able to participate. And I will do my best to work my schedule around what is possible. I appreciate Anya's comment on subgroups, but I can tell you that as a general rule, you end up, when there are subgroups, people end up having to also participate in those subgroups because they need to be paying attention to what is happening on a quicker scale. And it really ramped up the amount of work that we did during the RSC process. I know people on the call that were there saw that. It was a lot of extra meetings in addition to the work we were doing. And I think this group is small enough and probably nimble enough that I think we'd be better to be in the room on these conversations. So that's my 2 cents on subgroups. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Kristen. Senator Byer.
Thank you, Dave. I'm a little concerned about the direction of some of the conversations about markets and that forth. I'm torn between moving in the right direction and practicality. I'm afraid if we rely too heavy on, is there a market, we will never get one. And I guess I'm a little bit torn between what the responsibility will be under 582 of the producer organizations, recycling organizations, and the labeling piece on that. I'm more inclined to move in a direction, with rare exceptions, of saying you either use a recyclable packaging or be prepared to take it back and buy bigger and bigger warehouses. I think we may need to in the future to look towards severely limiting what can put in landfills. But that's kind of my direction, and I would hate to start us on a labeling process that puts into the wrong direction. Just a comment.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Tom.
Thanks. I just had a question about, I got more of a logistical question about the second phase of the work. We're talking about report due to the legislature in June. And I'm not sure how that gets done. Is the DEQ staff supporting this committee and is able to help craft and develop and do that legwork with the committee, or is the committee writing the report physically, or I'm just not sure how that is envisioned to play out.
That's a great question, Tom. Abby, would you like to hazard an answer to that?
Yeah, hazard. Thank you is probably a good word. DEQ will work on drafting at the direction of the chair. So we will, as appropriate, we want to be careful about not providing direction, but we'll follow the direction of the task force and build a report and draft things as directed. So it's a fine balance that we will have to take, but we are there to staff the work as needed.
Tom, did that answer your question well enough for today?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dylan?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Vice Chair Anya. She's made a couple of comments about the source of materials as being a potential determinant of recyclability. And I'm not 100% understanding what you mean by that. I was hoping you would mind, because it came up earlier in the dialogue and then just now, and I just curious what that means. I'm just can't quite wrap my head around it, but I'm also, I'm not a doctor like you. So.
Sorry, to be clear, not necessarily dictating recyclability, but I think as we're looking at misleading claims and like consumer protection in general, to the extent that we could provide feedback or recommendations on some of these other topics and potentially incorporate that in our labeling recommendations, looking at bio-based, biodegradable, all of those things, and recycled content claims, things like that, right? Like we know this can have impacts on recyclability, depending on what material you're using. Hopefully that's captured in some of the other label we're working on, right? If you're a PLA product, you shouldn't be entering our normal recycling stream, et cetera. But looking at, as we're here making we're the source for consumer protection and making recommendations to the extent that we have capacity, which I know will be limited, if we could offer some recommendations to the legislature on that front as well.
Thank you so much. That's a lot more clear. That was my only question.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go back to the meeting schedule. And I know we want to do this every few weeks. When were we planning for the second meeting for February? And I guess my question, just because I know the legislature is, fast and furious, at least up to that second chamber deadline on the 24th, what we were planning from a time perspective in that period, because that's about my only concern for participation is in that time period.
David, do you mind if I chime in here?
Of course, not at all.
So my thought was I'll be hopping on with DEQ staff after this call to address to be able to coordinate really quickly and send out a doodle poll. We'll try to provide a robust number of options for the group and then really try to focus on when the most of us are able to join, in particular having at least the chair or vice chair present at those meetings. February, March are both very challenging for not just Oregon in the Oregon legislature, but also other legislatures around the country. And, for those of us who work in additional states, then, that we'll have to address that as well. We're just all going to have to require some flexibility, I think, as a group and really figure out how we can prioritize or, ask for help and, other pieces like that. So I'll just say that we'll be as flexible as we can and get that information out to you very quickly so we can get that on the calendar very quickly.
And Dylan, what I've heard in the last 30 minutes are a number of requests for additional information on a number of fairly substantial issues. So as chair, you'll need to sort of sort through those and DEQ will support you to see how much information we can bring forward in the time allowed. But there are requests for guest speakers, so we have to work around their calendars. The sense I'm getting is that the next several meetings could pretty easily be consumed simply with information gathering and review. Is that your sense
agree.
as well?
It is my sense. I also felt that it may be that we may have to do a little homework, and where there is already information available. I think Alex has done a wonderful job in the documents that he compiled for the group, and having some burden on us in between meetings and not having all the meetings sort of information presented to us, I think is a reasonable burden for us as task force members. And again, but that said, yes, I do expect there to be a significant number of presentations. That's why we might need to do more meetings in the short term, at least.
Okay, Dylan, thank you for that. Anya?
To maximize our working time together, to the extent possible, we could collect questions for certain guest speakers. I think there are certain speakers we're absolutely going to want to present to the entire task force, but getting specific expertise on niche questions, we could collect questions in advance and just ask for a written report potentially, to kind of go into that homework that we all review in advance of meetings that the chair was just discussing.
All right, that's a interesting idea. Point noted there. Okay, we've got a little bit more time here. We do have one person who has expressed an interest in providing public comment. We'll probably get to that around 10:50. So you've got 14 more minutes if there is anything else that you task force members would like to elevate for the benefit of the whole and for Dylan as he tries to map out what's going to be a very busy 4 months. Anya, is your hand, did you raise it up again or is that an old one?
I did. I apologize for dominating the conversation here. I was just wondering if DEQ could, to the extent possible, provide us with an example report or two of past legislative task force, just so we could get a sense of scale and scope of previous examples.
Great suggestion.
Okay, we'll see what we can do there. Unless Abby, you want to jump in with anything right now?
Yes, thank you. So I've collected a few, Anya. I don't know that I've quite found any that are very similar to ours. The scale and scope will really be dependent upon what the task force wants. You can provide a lot of background, you can provide a little background. So yes, we can, I don't know that it's necessarily the right thing to be posting other people's task force reports, but I think we could send you some links there. So I haven't found the perfect one, but yeah, we'll keep looking and we'll give you an idea at least. And I don't know if the senator has any he particularly recommends. We can certainly take suggestions from there as well.
Okay, Senator Breyer, please let us know. You can do it offline if you'd like, if there's any reports you're particularly fond of. Thank you, and we'll go to Nicole next.
Thank you. I just have a couple more kind of what on the lines of Anya was talking about, whether it's past reports that DEQ has put together. But being part of these conversations, I can think about other conversations recently that have brought up two things that we may want to kind of do a deeper dive in. One, which is for everybody on this task force to truly understand when it comes to packaging, the percentages of whether it's paper or plastic and what type of plastic, because as someone mentioned earlier, we don't want to have a huge debate about compostables if it's not going to even be kind of, you know, part of the conversation at the end. So really making sure, someone else brought up end markets, you want to make sure we have the right packaging that we're focusing on. And then the second piece that seems to be an issue when trying to pass these truth in labeling for quite a few people is the cost of changing for molders and brand companies. So I don't know if there's a way to address that by talking to specific brand companies. And I'm sure Dylan, because of his work with brand companies and the Recycling Partnership, might have some information, but I just feel like I need to mention that because we can get big pushback from in the future if we don't kind of look at that at some point. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Just a point of clarification. You wanted task force members to understand the percentage of materials, the percentage of paper, the percentage of plastic. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? What percentages are you talking about?
Sure. I mean, obviously my background is plastic. So if you're looking at having a successful program and talk about truth in labeling and what is truly recyclable, you're going to want to look at things like plastic bottles, for example, or, H2PE bottles, or when we've talked about 3 through 7, what is the main materials that are the highest percentage in 3 through 7? That is packaging. And that is, something that we consider post-consumer. And you don't want to look at something that might be an engineering grade material that is, maybe 0.05% of all plastic packaging. I just think for all of us to understand all plastics are not the same, and paper products, I'm not as familiar, but I know that's not all the same as well.
Okay, so you're talking about the quantity of material available potentially for recycling, not percentage of access or percentage yield or percentage recovery. There's a lot of percentages in this field. So
no, not percentage of access, but I mean, that's a portion of it. But I think also just knowing what makes up the stream of materials for packaging for recycling.
Thank you, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kristen.
Thank you. So I just on the timing issue that Nicole raised and the cost, I think, hopefully that is something we can do within this report, is recommend to the legislature that we tie this in a way that is meaningful to other Senate Bill 582 timelines, so that, because some of those are out there, and I think we've always recognized there would be a need for providing a timeline for change that works for producers as they look to making these changes. So that I think is a good place to start for discussing timing and cost issues. David, I was really expecting you to start with the Baskin and Robbins 31 flavors analogy from the Recycling Steering Committee, but you went right to the Legos. So just to back it up to the 31 flavors, I feel like we're in that process right now of looking at the potential universe of the way things that can look, and we're going to do that over this shorter time. I mean, everything is a shorter time frame. And then we're going to move to the Legos piece about, okay, now let's take the building blocks that we have and the discussions that we have and build forward that report and aim for getting that there by April. Is that kind of the way the process is expected to move forward? So we're in that current gather information, 31 flavors piece, moving to Legos.
Was that a question, Kristen?
I'm not sure. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the process. So take it as a question, or just take it as a, yeah, you're right, or no, or yeah, do you have a new analogy? Because I can't find a Baskin Robbins anymore, much to my dismay.
And Legos recently announced they want their material to be recyclable. So Dylan, do you want to try and answer, or at least given your very preliminary thoughts around timing, that yes or no, the next month or two is largely about gathering information and filtering it and sifting it through, and then starting to build something so that by April or so we have at least a skeleton or a framework of a report that can then start being filled in?
Yeah, I mean, initial thoughts, that was certainly seems to be appropriate, and it seems there's a great deal of need for context and clarity for the task force members. In terms of the very specific work back plan, I think that would probably happen following in between the planning that needs to happen between this meeting and the next meeting. Hopefully we'll have a bit more clarity, and we'd be working together as a task force to build that up. So
thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Jenny.
So this is more directed towards Dylan and Anya. I know that over the past couple of years, it feels like time doesn't move, but it does, and it goes quite quickly. And I am it does feel like we don't really have that much time, and there is just so much information that we've requested in this meeting alone. And every time you get a new speaker, it just brings up so many more questions. It's like a never-ending workflow. So one of the things I know that Dylan and Anya, you guys have taken on a big role as chair and vice chair, but I would be happy to help too. And sort of, I feel like we need to have some sort of a repository for everything, and besides just the website. And I feel like what we're struggling with, or what will be a struggle, is trying to define our scope for what our report will be. And right now, when I'm thinking about it, it just feels like it's enormous. And so I would be happy to help as we start bringing in all of this background information and getting all of these speakers. The more that we get, I think we'll start getting a better sense of what is relevant and what might not be relevant. And I would be happy to help, whether that's like putting a document together, or a spreadsheet together, or like a project management workflow or something like that, so that we have a visual to work from at each meeting, recognizing that we all probably have a lot of background reading to do outside of our meeting, so that our meeting time can be more of productive work sessions. Because even if we have 2 meetings a month, that's still not very many meetings before we're in report writing mode. So whatever I can do to help outside of our actual meeting time to try to bring all that information together in a way that's accessible, and then we can start narrowing things down. I'm just putting that offer out there. It's not really a question. It's just kind of like a, how can I help offer?
I'd like to offer my gratitude for your offer, and I'm sure we will avail ourselves. This will take the entire task force to get to that report, that final report. And I think working with DEQ staff to help narrow that will be incredibly helpful and valuable to us as we're moving forward. I think keeping on task and narrowing the scope is something that we as task force members as a whole are really going to, have to struggle with, because we're curious intellectual folks, I'm sure, and wanting to get to know more information. So your help in managing that is welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Dylan, is there anything else that you'd like to ask of the task force members to help you prepare for the next steps?
No, just be responsive. I think this is for all of us, when especially the meeting surveys, we'll have some deadlines that will go out in addition to that. So please just try to adhere to those deadlines. As Jenny said, this time will pass very quickly, but it will also be over very quickly. And so let's try to work together to be as impactful as possible, and do what the legislation has charged us to do as a task force. So that's all I would say. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Dave Larmuth.
I realized if I raise my hand right here, I can high five myself on the screen. But what I meant to say was that I'm certainly happy to devote as much time as I can outside of these meetings to outside reading. I would ask if we can have a few days, as many days in advance as possible for that. I read slow some days. I read fast when I'm typing it, but I read slow when it's other people, especially and no knock on the plastics industry, but some of those words are long and they have like hyphens and things, and it'd just be good to have that extra time, because this is complicated stuff, and it takes sometimes a few tries to read through, especially if you're talking about bringing in more technical papers. I'd appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Okay. Any final comments from task force members? Going once, going twice. Okay, let's turn and give a couple of minutes to, I believe it's Brian. Alex, can you help me out here? Was it Brian who wanted to provide some public testimony?
Correct.
Okay, Brian Gardner, you can have 3 minutes, please. Unmute yourself.
Hi. Okay, well, I'll paste the full comments in the side mean, this isn't going to get me out to all of it, but as a game theorist, I strongly agree with Lee Beyer. The task is not to try to recycle packaging that is currently used. The goal should be to try to use packaging that can be recycled or is ideally composted with minimal impact in production. While this can be done by regulation or by neoliberalism, I believe the best path forward is to mandate that the company that uses the packaging is responsible for financing and carbon offsetting the cost and the impact of the materials that are used. Consumers should not be responsible for making a Hobson's choice between products based on the packages that are used to the market and distribute them. The only entity that can truly impact the decision of what kind of packaging is used is the producers and the packagers of the good. Put more explicitly, if you map out decision trees, the consumer comes along the middle of the decision tree in which other players have already acted and is faced with a choice that must be made with multiple factors of preference, including freshness, size, etc. As rational actors, they necessarily discount the future, and any individual actor is only part of the whole, therefore facing collective action problems. These two things would dissuade even the most environmentally conscious consumer from making their decision based primarily on recyclability or compostability, especially when having to choose between two mediocre options. True power to control where a decision tree branches lies at the earliest decisions, one of which is rather to package in a way that is truly environmentally responsible or not. As consumers' preferences further down the branch is only going to be partially made based on environmental factors, incentive to use environmental packaging is by default negligible at this early phase. And that's how we wind up with the Hobson's choices that we have today. However, the impact of not using environmental packaging is part of the existential challenge that faces our state, our country, and the world. We must therefore mandate specific actions making producers take the costs of disposal of the goods used in packaging rather than pass the impact of their decisions onto the public of the future, notably consisting of all of our sons and daughters. By doing this, we remove the price incentives to choose more damaging materials. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Okay, let's pivot to next steps. Someone, it's either going to be DEQ or the chair, will send out a doodle poll for at least the next meeting, and maybe we'll schedule the next several meetings or try to. There will also be an agenda for at least the next meeting, and that will be developed with Dylan, by Dylan. DEQ can help you with that, Dylan, if you want it. We will also post notes from this meeting, and we'll make the recording available, and we'll figure out exactly what that means outside of the public records request process. Abby, are there any closing words you'd like to share with this group before we sign off?
Just once again, thank you for today and for all the work that you're going to do, and especially all the people leaning in to do extra work. I think it is going to be a team effort. And then a reminder, we will have hopefully 2 additional committee members that will join us as soon as that process is complete. So more brains on this topic. So thanks again, really appreciate it. And this should be fun.
Thanks, Abby. Dylan, anything you'd like to share?
I would just echo that this is also my idea of fun, Abby, and I'm looking forward to doing this hard work with all of the task force members and doing it impactfully and efficiently. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dylan. Kristen?
This is going to be a great group. I'm really looking forward to making some excellent progress. So I just really participate in a meaningful way. And thanks for making it fun by starting off with pets. So I just recommend that for all of us that have one, we get our pets posted up for next time to give DEQ some more options for pet postings. And let's not leave those cats out. I know there are a lot out there, but if somebody needs a dog photo because you don't have one, let me know. I've got 3. Happy to provide some assistance for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, DEQ staff are just so impressed with the caliber of all the task force members and really excited to have the opportunity to support you in this journey. So I see that someone has just posted a video of what appeared to be an animal. What is that? It's okay, well, whatever it is. So I think the meeting is adjourned for the day, and thank you all very much. We'll look forward to continuing to support you in the future.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.